Not every silence lingers heavy is peace. Sometimes it's a scream. You tell yourself it's nothing. Just a quiet moment, just a breath between words, just a normal stillness that sits in a room when people run out of things to say. But somewhere deep in your chest, you know it's not the same kind of silence as before. This one feels heavier, denser, as if it has weight you can't measure, but can still feel pressing against your ribs. It's the kind of silence that doesn't soothe. It hovers, waiting for someone to break it, but neither of you does. At first, you tried to convince yourself that this is what peace feels like: calm, still, uneventful. But there's an edge to it, a strange hum, like the air is holding its breath. You notice the way they scroll their phone without really looking at it, the way their eyes dart toward the window instead of toward you. You notice that you've started to drink your coffee slower, not because you're savoring it, but because there's nothing else to do with your hands. This isn't peace, it's retreat. And retreat in relationships doesn't come with the sound of footsteps. It comes with the sound of nothing at all. There's a kind of silence lingers heavy, that is warm, the one you feel when you're wrapped in someone's arms. No words needed because you're both breathing the same rhythm. That's the silence lingers heavy people write poems about. That's the silence that heals. But there's another kind, the kind that starts after too many arguments have been swept under the rug, where they've grown into bumps you keep tripping over. The kind that follows a fight that never had a real ending, only an unfinished sentence. The kind where words are not absent because nothing is wrong, but because so much is wrong that neither of you knows where to begin. This silence isn't the absence of noise, it's the absence of safety. It happens slowly, one conversation at a time. At first, you both speak less to avoid another fight. Then, you start to filter what you say, removing anything that might poke at the wound. Then, without even realizing it, you stop sharing things altogether. Not just the problems, but the little moments too. What you saw today, what you thought about, what you dreamed last night. It all stays inside because it feels easier that way. But easier is not always healthier. And comfort is not always connection. Sometimes, silence lingers, heavy, is a shield. You use it because you think you're protecting the relationship. If we don't talk about it, it can't hurt us. If I don't bring it up, maybe it will disappear. But silence lingers heavy is not a healer. It's a slow, patient sculptor. It shapes distance between you one day at a time, carving away the closeness until you're two people sitting side by side, strangers with shared memories. And here's the truth you've been avoiding. Silence in its worst form is not the lack of war, it's the slow construction of a wall. You see it in the way your partner's laugh feels rarer now, as if joy costs too much energy. You see it in the way their stories trail off because they can't tell if you're listening, and maybe they've stopped believing you are. You feel it in the way your mind starts filling in their thoughts for them. They must be upset with me. They must be disappointed. They must not care anymore. You think you're keeping the peace by staying quiet, but all you're doing is letting the silence lingers heavy way of saying the cruelest things. What makes this kind of silence dangerous is that it doesn't feel urgent. Arguments feel urgent. You can hear the volume, feel the heat, see the impact. Silence lingers is different. It's subtle. It convinces you that nothing is happening while it's slowly unthreading the bond between you. By the time you notice the unraveling, half the fabric is already gone. And then one day, you wake up and realize you don't remember the last time you truly talked. Not just about schedules and bills and plans, but about you, about how you're feeling, about what you're afraid of, about where you're going together. That's when it hits you. This isn't a pause. This is a drift. Silence can be safety, but silence lingers had also be surrender. The difference lies in whether it's chosen together or slipped into without consent. Mutually chosen silence is soft and grounding. Unspoken silence, the kind you never talked about, is sharp, even if it never cuts out loud. Sometimes, The deepest hurt isn't from the words spoken in anger, but from the words that never get spoken at all, because the fights at least tell you the other person still cares enough to respond. The silences, they can start to sound like goodbye. And maybe that's the part that scares you the most, not the possibility of another argument, but the possibility that the argument is over, not because you solved it, but because one of you stopped believing it was worth having. Here's the truth no one tells you about relationships. The absence of conflict does not mean the presence of connection, and the absence of words does not mean the presence of peace. Sometimes the quiet is nothing more than a scream with its volume turned all the way down. And if you listen closely enough, you'll realize it's been screaming for a long time. You've been told all your life that silence lingers, heavy's golden, that if you have nothing nice to say, you shouldn't say anything at all, that patience is quiet, that love knows how to wait. And so, in moments when your relationship feels tense, you reach for silence, the way some people reach for prayer, as if stillness alone can turn water into wine, distance into closeness. It makes sense at first. You're tired of the cycles, the endless back and forth where every sentence feels like it's been sharpened before it's spoken. You think, if I can just stop talking, the storm will pass. You believe silence lingers, heavy's shelter. But shelter only works if the walls protect you from the rain, not if they lock you inside while the air grows thinner. The kind of silence that erodes love doesn't arrive as a loud decision. It seeps in, like water under a door. It slides into the spaces between you before you notice the floor is wet. At first, it feels like relief. No arguing, no accusations, no emotional exhaustion from fighting the same fight again. But you forget something crucial. Arguments, as draining as they can be, are still a form of connection. They are still an exchange of energy, a willingness to be seen, to be heard, to fight for understanding. Silence, on the other hand, is an absence, and absence does not build anything. It only hollows. You don't realize how much the hollowing changes you until you start to behave differently without meaning to. You stop bringing up the little things because you don't want them to become big things. You stop asking certain questions because you're afraid of the answers. You stop sharing your real feelings because you've convinced yourself they won't matter. And maybe they've stopped sharing too. Not because they don't feel anything, but because they've been met with the same quiet so many times that speaking now feels pointless. Here's the strange part. This shared silence lingers, heavy to feel like unity. You both sit at dinner with minimal conversation and think, we're fine, no one's upset. But you're not fine, you're frozen. And when you're frozen long enough, you start to mistake numbness for peace. Psychologists call this avoidant coping. It's what happens when, instead of facing pain, you dodge it. You bury it under routine. You wrap it in small talk. You lock it in the attic and pray it never finds the stairs. And it works for a while. Life feels calmer. The air is lighter, but the wound is still there. And in the dark, it grows. Silence is a perfect breeding ground for assumptions. And assumptions, once they take root, don't need truth to survive. They only need your imagination. You imagine they've stopped loving you because they don't touch you as much. You imagine they've lost respect for you because they don't ask for your opinion. You imagine they're bored, frustrated, angry, and yet you never ask. And they imagine things about you too, because that's what humans do in the absence of answers. We invent them. And in relationships, invented answers have a way of becoming emotional facts, even if they're built on nothing but silence. You may think silence lingers heavy is safer than a fight, but a fight can be healed. Silence often can't, at least not without breaking it first. And breaking it takes courage. It means risking discomfort. It means speaking when your chest feels tight, when your voice shakes, when you can already imagine the argument that might follow. But it also means giving your love a chance to breathe again. Because here's the paradox. When you avoid pain, you avoid the truth. And when you avoid the truth, you avoid the very thing that could save you. In a healthy relationship, silence lingers is a choice you make together, a comfort you agree on. In an unhealthy one, Silence lingers heavy as something you fall into without realizing, until it feels normal to speak less, to feel less, to live beside someone without truly living with them. And if you've been in that kind of silence long enough, you start to forget what it's like to be deeply seen. You start to adapt to a smaller version of love, a love that doesn't challenge, doesn't risk, doesn't reach. But that smaller love isn't peace, it's survival. And surviving is not the same as living. You may think you're protecting the relationship by not rocking the boat, but silence lingers heavy to water calm. It's letting the current carry you both toward a shore neither of you chose. And one day, you'll look around and realize you've drifted so far that the person beside you is more memory than partner. That's the quiet truth. Silence can look like safety while it quietly becomes surrender. And the longer you wait to speak, the harder it becomes to find the words again. Not all silences are created equal. Some are made of rest, the kind where you can sit with your partner on a park bench, watching the world pass by and not feel the need to fill the air. Others are made of ache, the kind where you hear everything except their voice, and that absence feels louder than any sound. When silence lingers, heavy shows up in your relationship, it's usually wearing one of three disguises. And if you can learn to recognize them, you can tell the difference between a quiet that's healthy and a quiet that's slowly undoing you. 1. The healing silence. This is the rarest and the most beautiful. It's the silence lingers that follows a moment of honesty, when words have been spoken and received, and now both of you are simply letting them settle. You know this silence by its softness. Your body stays relaxed. The air between you feels warm, not cold. You may not be looking at each other, but you know without doubt that the connection is still intact. This is the kind of silence that happens after tears, after laughter, after intimacy. The healing silence is not a lack of communication. It's a pause in the conversation that says, I trust you enough not to rush this moment. It's the emotional exhale that lets love rest its head for a while. But here's the thing, this silence can only exist when communication has already happened. Without the conversation before it, it's not healing, it's hiding. And too many couples mistake hiding for healing until it's too late. 2. The avoidance silence. This is the silence that pretends to keep the peace, but actually builds walls. It happens when something uncomfortable is bubbling under the surface, a disagreement, a hurt feeling, a disappointment, and instead of addressing it, you both choose to look the other way. It starts small, a comment left unanswered, a phone picked up at the wrong time, an evening where you both pretend you're too tired to talk. But inside, you're replaying the moment that upset you over and over, letting it shape how you see them. Avoidance silence lingers heavy, feels calm from the outside, but tense from the inside. Your shoulders are tighter. Your voice, when you finally use it, is clipped. You tell yourself you're letting it go, but really you're just letting it grow roots, and those roots are hard to pull out. The danger with avoidance silence lingers heavy is that it's seductive. It convinces you that not talking is easier, that the issue will fade if you don't give it attention. But relationships aren't plants you can neglect. They're fires you have to tend. Without fuel, the warmth goes out. Without care, the flame dies. 3. The resigned silence. This is the most dangerous silence of all. It's not chosen for healing, and it's not temporary avoidance. It's the silence lingers heavy that comes when someone has stopped believing that talking will change anything. You know this silence by the absence of effort. There's no tension because there's no expectation, no arguments because there's no hope of being understood. Conversations shrink to logistics. What time will you be home? Did you pay the bill? And the emotional world you once shared becomes a locked room you no longer visit. Resigned silence is the quiet of giving up without leaving. You may still share a home, a bed, even a life, but you're no longer building anything together. You're simply existing side by side, like two books on the same shelf, touching but unread. This silence doesn't explode, it erases. And once it's erased enough, You can wake up one day to find that the person beside you feels like a stranger, one you used to know deeply, one whose voice once lit up your whole world, but who now blends into the background hum of your life. What these silences are really saying: here's the truth, silence is never neutral. Every kind of quiet in a relationship is saying something. Sometimes it's saying, I feel safe with you. Sometimes it's saying, I don't want to fight. Sometimes it's saying, I've stopped trying. The mistake we make is treating all silences the same, assuming that no words means no problem, or that stillness always means peace. But silence, especially the kind that lingers, is a language of its own, and if you don't learn to translate it, you risk missing the messages that matter most. If you've been living in the healing kind of silence, protect it, nurture it, recognize it for the gift it is. But if you've been living in avoidance or resignation, you have a choice to make. One that will determine whether this silence lingers, heavy choice to make. One that will determine whether this silence lingers, heavy choice to make. One that will determine whether this silence, no bride or rafidi vokomma, but what's the teacher's pokomma, was that silence way peace, pretend to think cool, so to veti toist, but to nakov, the geba become lo examt. Because the only way to change the meaning of silence, no bride or rafidi vokomma, they'll accent, because the only way to change the meaning of silence, no bride or rafidi vokomma tomats of the two beginning with their quarter sep. Fear hush trembling of saying the wrong thing, fear hush trembling of worse, fear hush trembling the door to another exhausting argument. So the silence stretches day after day, week after week, until speaking feels strange, like trying to use muscles you haven't moved in years. But here's the truth you need to hold on to. Silence is a habit, and like any habit, it can be unlearned if you're willing to be intentional. Step 1. Name the silence without accusation. You don't break a harmful silence by throwing words at it like rocks. You break it by opening the smallest possible crack of honesty and letting light in. That means starting with the simplest truth you can offer. I feel like we've been quieter than usual lately, and I miss talking to you. Not, you never talk to me anymore. Not, why are you ignoring me? Just an observation, gentle, human, and free of blame. When you name the silence, you make it visible, and once it's visible, it's harder to ignore. Step 2, share, don't demand. It's tempting to go straight into questions. Why aren't you talking to me? What's wrong? What did I do? But questions can feel like spotlights, and people rarely open up under a spotlight. Instead, go first. Share something about your day, your feelings, your fears. Let them see that the door is open without forcing them to walk through it. Vulnerability is contagious, but only if it feels safe. I've been feeling a little disconnected lately, and I don't want us to drift apart. I just wanted you to know, when you offer your truth without asking for theirs in return, you plant the seed of trust, and trust is the only soil where words can grow. Step 3, listen without editing. When they do speak, resist the urge to correct, defend, or fix right away. Let them get it all out before you shape your reply. Interrupting someone's vulnerability with your counterpoint is like cutting a flower before it blooms. Sometimes people stay silent because they've learned that speaking leads to being misunderstood. Your job is to prove that's not always true. Listen not just to their words, but to their pauses, their tone, the way their shoulders move when they breathe. Sometimes the most important part of what they're telling you is hiding between the sentences. Step 4, create safe, predictable spaces for talking. Not every conversation has to happen in the heat of the moment. In fact, many of the most healing ones happen when nothing urgent is on the table. Set aside small, consistent windows to check in. Maybe over breakfast once a week, or during a walk, or before bed. Make it a ritual, not a rescue mission. That way, speaking isn't only something you do when something is wrong. It's something you do because you value staying close. These moments become anchors, and anchors keep you from drifting too far in the first place. Step 5. Redefine silence. Lingers heavy together. Silence doesn't have to be the enemy. The goal isn't to fill every second with sound, but to make sure that when silence does arrive, It feels safe instead of sharp. That means talking about it openly. I love that we can be quiet together and still feel connected. But if our quiet ever starts to feel heavy, let's promise to name it. When silence is a shared choice, instead of an unspoken standoff, it stops being a wall and becomes a blanket. Daily practices to keep the wrong silence away. If you want to keep your relationship alive with words, you can't just rely on big conversations. The real magic is in the daily, almost invisible habits. 1. 3 minutes of truth. Every day, set aside 3 minutes where you each share one thing you're feeling and one thing you're grateful for. No interruptions, no fixing, just being heard. 2. The little noticings. When you see something about them you appreciate, say it out loud. Don't wait for a big anniversary or milestone. I love softly, warmly the way you laugh when you're surprised. I noticed you made my coffee the way I like it. These small acknowledgements keep the air between you warm. 3. Conflict before bed. If something small bothers you, speak it before you sleep. Not with the goal of fully solving it, but so it doesn't harden overnight. A soft, "that moment earlier hurt me a little," can keep small wounds from becoming walls. 4. Silence check-ins. Once a month, ask each other, how has our quiet been feeling lately? Peaceful or heavy? This simple question can catch avoidance before it turns into resignation. What happens when you break the wrong silence? The first time you try to break it, it might feel awkward. It might even trigger some defensiveness, but keep going. Words are muscles. The more you use them, the easier they flex. Over time, you'll notice the changes. The air between you feels lighter. Conversations start to happen without being forced. Silence returns, but this time, it feels like comfort instead of caution. And when you do sit together in that warm, healing quiet, you'll know it's because you've earned it. By speaking when it was hard, by choosing discomfort over distance, by remembering that love softly, warmly, without words, eventually stops speaking altogether. The gentle truth: not every silence lingers heavies. Some silences are full of love, and some are full of goodbyes that haven't been said out loud. The difference is whether you leave it alone or touch it with care. Whether you let it grow wild until it pulls you apart, or you tend it like a garden until it becomes something that feeds you both. Breaking silence isn't about talking more, it's about talking with intention. It's about letting the person you love know that their voice matters to you, and so does your own. It's about replacing the kind of quiet that starves love with the kind that lets it rest. Because peace isn't found in the absence of words, it's found in the presence of trust. And if this has been your reminder, if some part of you knows you've been living in the wrong kind of quiet, maybe tonight is the night you open your mouth, even if your voice shakes. Because sometimes love, softly, warmly, is just waiting for someone to speak first. Soft call to action: if this resonates